Welcome, everybody. We have a great lineup of talks today. I am super excited about the whole day on this wondrous 420. This morning, particularly, I am super excited about the next three speakers, and you have made a good choice at waking up early to come see these talks. So this is the Altered States of Consciousness session. We're going to have three speakers. Each of them is going to go for about 35 minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end of each talk. Up first is Emma Huels, who's from the University of Michigan, speaking on the neural correlates of shamanic states of consciousness, and I am super excited about this one. Welcome up.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Great, wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, and as was mentioned, my name is Emma Huels, and I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Michigan studying neuroscience. And this is my first time actually coming to the Science of Consciousness conference, and it's been absolutely wonderful so far. It's really amazing to be in a place with so many other people who are also interested in consciousness. And I'm very thankful today to have been invited to discuss the neural correlates of the shamanic state of consciousness. So shamanism is one of the world's oldest spiritual... Is that okay? Okay. Shamanism is one of the world's oldest spiritual practices, with shamanic journeying having been used worldwide for physical, psychological, and spiritual healing since the Paleolithic era. And during shamanic trance, a shaman in cases of indigenous tribes, or shamanic practitioner in cases of neo-shamanism in the Western world, enters an altered state of consciousness through pharmacologic or non-pharmacologic means. Pharmacologic means entail ingesting some sort of psychoactive substance, such as ayahuasca, whereas non-pharmacologic means usually involve listening to a slow repetitive rhythm, such as a drum or rattle, and dancing to enter this altered state. And it's the job of the shamanic practitioner to use information gleaned during shamanic trance to heal others. Additionally, there's significant anecdotal overlap between shamanic practitioners and the experience of individuals who have taken psychedelics. So for example, shamanic practitioners will report feelings of disembodiment. They will have spiritual or mystical experiences and may have feelings of unity or bliss or insightfulness, and even will report ego death. And all of these can be traits of the psychedelic state as well. However, despite the widespread use of shamanic healing practices, as well as the similarities to the psychedelic state I just mentioned, very few studies have examined brain activity during the shamanic state of consciousness, with just one fMRI and one EEG case study to date. If we take a look at that previous research, Hove et al. In 2016 investigated brain activity in shamanic practitioners using fMRI. So they compared brain activation during periods of trance and non-trance states during repetitive drumming, and found increased activity in the posterior cingulate cortex, dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, and the left insula, as well as increased co-activation with the posterior cingulate cortex in these other two regions. And overall, this suggests amplified control and default mode network activity. However, this study lacked naive controls, and while they did do a within-subject comparison, they compared activity during shamanic trance to a non-trance state during repetitive drumming, albeit that drumming was slightly altered, which opens the possibility that these shamanic practitioners reflexively entered the shamanic state of consciousness during this time, which would confound its use as a control condition. If we look at the Fleur-Henry et al. Study, they investigated brain activity during shamanic trance using EEG in a single subject, and found increased low and high beta activity, as well as increased anterior-posterior coherence in the high beta band. However, as I mentioned, this was a case study, meaning it was data from a single shamanic practitioner, and it's difficult to be able to generalize these findings to the larger shamanic practitioner population. And so we sought to investigate the neural correlates of the shamanic state of consciousness using high-density electroencephalography, or EEG, while accounting for the limitations of these past studies. We recruited 24 shamanic practitioners and 24 age and sex match controls. To be included, shamanic practitioners had to have a minimum of 5 years of experience and have completed at least 40 healing sessions over the last 5 years. They had to have received training at least one shamanic tradition, as well as previously used rhythmic drumming to enter the shamanic state of consciousness. and they had to be able to enter shamanic trance within 15 minutes. Finally, they were excluded if they had a history of epilepsy or traumatic brain injury. Now, for our control participants, the criteria was quite strict. So to be included, individuals couldn't have a past exposure or interest in shamanic practice, even through the media. They couldn't have any experience with spiritual healing, meditation, or spiritual training. They couldn't have a history of trance or hypnosis, nor a history of hallucinogen, ethnogen, or psychedelic drug use. They couldn't have a history of drumming, professional musicianship, or listening to frequent drumming music. And finally, they were excluded if they had a current or past diagnosis of depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, or any other psychological condition, if they had traumatic brain injury or epilepsy, or if they had really any other untreated physical or psychological condition. And before I move on, I did want to just take a second to highlight the religious and spiritual traditions that were cited by our shamanic practitioners as being important to their training or practice. And I'm not going to go over everything in this table, but on each line we have data from one shamanic practitioner, and we've listed each tradition that's being important to them. And just to highlight a few, you can see that these individuals cited religions such as Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, as well as a variety of shamanic practices such as Slavic shamanism, Peruvian shamanism, Siberian shamanism, etc. So on the day of the study experiment, all individuals underwent baseline high-density EEG recordings with 128 electrodes, and these were during periods of eyes open and eyes closed wakefulness. Following this, all individuals were randomized for the order that they underwent 3 different experiments, which were cognitive testing, which is in green, shamanic drumming, which is in purple, and classical music, which is in red. And during the shamanic drumming experiment, all individuals listened to a rhythmic drumming recording that was generated using a drumming piece by Michael Harner. And the shamanic practitioners were asked to enter the shamanic state of consciousness during this time, whereas the controls were asked to just rest quietly with their eyes closed. And when I was mentioning the Hovedal study earlier, I said that it's very important to carefully choose our control condition when studying the shamanic state of consciousness. And so we designed this classical music experiment, which was made using 2 different pieces. One was a Beethoven piece that was violin and piano, and another was a Mozart piece that was piano only. And we chose classical music because it's both rhythmic and lacks vocals, similar to shamanic drumming, but it's different enough that these shamanic practitioners won't reflexively enter shamanic trance during this time. And so during that classical music experiment, all individuals were asked to just rest quietly with their eyes closed listening, and the shamanic practitioners were explicitly asked to not enter the shamanic state of consciousness during this time. And following the shamanic drumming and classical music experiments, all individuals filled out an altered state of consciousness questionnaire known as the Huels scale. And this just was a series of questions about their experience during both drumming and classical music. At the end of the study day, everyone again underwent a eyes closed and eyes open EEG recording. And I just did want to clarify that we recorded EEG throughout this entire study day. It wasn't just during those baseline periods. Now, the last thing I did want to say before moving on is that this talk is focused on brain activity during the shamanic state of consciousness, so I won't be discussing the cognitive test data today. So for the altered states of consciousness, or ASC questionnaire data, we pooled that 66-item questionnaire into 11 domains put forth by Studeris et al. In 2010, which was known as the new OAV scale. And these domains ranged from disembodiment and complex imagery to insightfulness and elementary visual alterations. And each of these domains was just meant to capture different traits of the experience of these shamanic practitioners, as well as the controls if they had them. And we then calculated the percent of the theoretical scale maximum for each domain in each individual, and then calculated the mean and standard error of the mean for all shamanic practitioners and all controls in each domain. We compared scores between the shamanic practitioners and controls, as well as between the drumming and classical music conditions. Additionally, given the anecdotal overlap I mentioned earlier between shamanic trance and the psychedelic state, we compared the ASC scores of shamanic practitioners during drumming to the scores of individuals who had received ketamine, psilocybin, or MDMA in a previous study, which was Studeris et al. In 2010. And finally, we also investigated relationships between these domain scores and measures of EEG that were significantly different between shamanic practitioners and controls. Now, before I move on, I did just want to take a second to give a brief overview of EEG. I know that we have a really diverse audience here, which is great. And given that this talk is EEG intensive, I just wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. So what is electroencephalography, or EEG? EEG is a neuroimaging technique used to measure electrical activity in the brain through the scalp. And this activity is electrical oscillations made by collections of neurons within the cortex. This means that rather than measuring activity from a single neuron, we're actually measuring the activity from many, many neurons combined. And while we're not able to say exactly what specific regions of the brain are generating this activity, we can see where changes in activity are occurring across the scalp, such as in the front of the brain or the back of the brain, or et cetera. And the more electrodes you have, the better an inference you're able to make about where those changes in activity are occurring. Additionally, whenever we are analyzing these oscillations, we can divide them into different frequency bands. And these frequency bands are delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. And I know everybody heard a little bit about those yesterday. And while we don't know exactly why we have these different frequencies of activity, we do have an idea of different states and behavior where activity within these different frequency bands occurs. So for example, you have delta activity, which is 1 to 4 hertz, and this occurs during non-REM sleep and general anesthesia, as well as pathologic states such as sepsis. Theta activity occurs during drowsiness and deep meditative states. Alpha in the 8 to 13 hertz range occurs during eyes closed, relaxed wakefulness in humans. And another note is that pretty consistently in the literature, we know that alpha activity is decreased during the psychedelic state. Beta activity is often associated with motor behavior as well as eyes open wakefulness. And finally, gamma activity is anything over 30 hertz and is associated with consciousness, perception, and cognition. And I did just want to make a note that this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are other states and behaviors that have been associated with activity within these different frequency bands, and I just kind of wanted to give an example of each. So for our EEG analysis, we had 18 shamanic practitioners and 19 control participants, and this was after we removed individuals who had incomplete data or poor data quality. And following pre-processing and filtering of 1 to 45 hertz, we computed 4 different EEG measures within each of the 7 frequency bands on the right-hand side of the screen. And these measures were EEG power, functional connectivity, measured by the weighted phase lag index, neural signal diversity, measured by Lempel-Ziv complexity, and criticality, measured by the pair correlation function. And while measures like criticality are estimated using the entire brain activity, the other measures we averaged across all electrodes. And I'm not going to say anything else about how we calculated these specific measures, but I am going to give a conceptual overview of what each measure is, just to again give a little bit better context to the findings of this study. And so our first 2 measures are EEG power and functional connectivity. So EEG power is the amplitude of the signal squared. And broadly speaking, the more EEG power you have, the more activity is in a given frequency band. And this is often illustrated using a spectrogram, which is on the left-hand side of the screen. And this shows the distribution of power across frequencies over time, where warmer colors indicate greater power and cooler colors indicate less power. And you have frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. For functional connectivity, this measures whether spatially distinct signals have a temporal correlation. In other words, we're looking at whether there is a phase lead-lag relationship between the signals from 2 different electrodes. And this is illustrated by the figure on the right, where you can see a red signal and a blue signal. And that red signal is ahead of the blue signal in terms of phase by a specific amount, and it seems consistent. And this means that the red signal is consistently leading and the blue signal is consistently lagging, which means there's a temporal correlation, and we say they're functionally connected, which broadly speaking just means that they're kind of synchronized in their activity. Now, if sometimes the blue signal was ahead and other times the red signal was ahead, and the amount that phase difference occurred varied, then we would say that there's not a temporal relationship and therefore they're not functionally connected. Next, we have Lempel-Ziv complexity. And this is a surrogate for neural signal diversity that measures the number of different patterns within the neural signal. And this has been used across species during perturbations in consciousness. So we know from previous studies that during depressed states of consciousness with low levels of phenomenal content, such as during coma and general anesthesia, which are on the left side of that continuum, that neural signal diversity is low, whereas during states such as normal wakefulness and the psychedelic state, which are on the right side of that continuum, that neural signal diversity is high. Additionally, we know that changes in complexity correlate with changes in experience during the psychedelic state, meaning that the greater the increase in complexity, the richer the experience reported by the individual. And so given that we know how complexity changes during the psychedelic state, and again, those similarities in the phenomenology between psychedelics and shamanic trance, we thought it would be interesting to see how complexity is changing during the shamanic state of consciousness. So for the last measure, this is criticality. And we mentioned this a little bit yesterday. So criticality is this balanced state between order and disorder that exists ubiquitously across physical and biological systems. And the state of criticality is accompanied by various functional benefits, such as large information storage, optimal information transmission, and a flexible response to stimuli. And previous studies suggest that brain functioning resides at a critical state, which is illustrated by that light green box on the right-hand side of the screen. And a loss of consciousness is associated with a loss of criticality, such as during states like sleep, anesthesia, and unresponsive wakefulness syndrome. In contrast, a recent study by Adesoy et al. Found that during the psychedelic state, criticality was increased. So similar to complexity, since we do know how this changes during psychedelics, we thought it would be interesting to see how criticality is changing during the shamanic state of consciousness. Now, to give you a better idea of what I mean about this balanced state between order and disorder, I want you to think of the liquid vapor critical point of water, which is a temperature at which both more ordered liquid states and more disordered gaseous states both exist. And this is similar to criticality in the brain, where at a critical point, brain functioning fluctuates between more ordered or synchronized states and more disordered or desynchronized states. And we can measure this fluctuation between synchronized and desynchronized states using something called the pair correlation function, which just measures the variance in the global synchronization. And we know that this variance is highest at a critical point, and as there's a shift towards a supercritical or subcritical state, which means you're going towards more desynchronized or synchronized states, that fluctuation goes down and the pair correlation function goes down with it. Now I'm going to actually move on to the actual findings from this study. So I'm going to be starting with the Altered States of Consciousness questionnaire data. And I know this is a really busy slide, so just bear with me and I'm going to walk everyone through it. We're going to be starting with the panel on the left-hand side of the screen, which is A. And in this plot, we have shamanic practitioners in purple and control participants in green. And on the x-axis, we have each of those 11 ASC domains. And on the y-axis, we have the percent of the theoretical scale maximum, which was their score on each of those domains. And I bolded each of the domains that were significantly different between shamanic practitioners and controls. So shamanic practitioners had ASC scores that were higher than control participants during drumming in the domains of complex imagery, experience of unity, spiritual experience, blissful state, disembodiment, insightfulness, elementary visual alterations, and changed meaning of percepts. So overall, this suggests that shamanic practitioners are entering an altered state of consciousness during shamanic drumming, and the control participants are not. And this is further supported by the plot in the middle, which is comparing ASC scores in shamanic practitioners and controls during classical music. And here you can see that that difference in scores has disappeared. And so now they're reporting ASC scores that are virtually the same, meaning that shamanic practitioners are only entering the altered state of consciousness during shamanic drumming. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, we have our final plot, which is comparing ASC scores in shamanic practitioners during drumming to individuals who had received ketamine, which is in blue, psilocybin, which is in green, or MDMA, which is in orange. And as a reminder, these are data from Studeris et al. In 2010. And here we can see that shamanic practitioners had scores that were actually higher than individuals who had received any of the three psychedelics in the domains of complex imagery, experience of unity, spiritual experience, or insightfulness. Now for the remaining domains, shamanic practitioners had scores that were similar to different psychedelic states depending on the domain. So for example, shamanic practitioners had scores on the disembodiment domain that were similar to ketamine, but their scores on the blissful state domain were more similar to MDMA. And so overall, this again suggests that shamanic practitioners are entering an altered state of consciousness, and the phenomenology is similar to the psychedelic state, but their experience doesn't necessarily map on perfectly to any one drug, and rather represents a blend of traits from each of these psychedelics. So next I'm going to be moving on to the EEG findings from the study, starting with EEG power. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a spectrogram, which is comparing EEG power in shamanic practitioners to controls. So warmer colors indicate greater power in shamanic practitioners, and cooler colors indicate greater power in controls. And we have frequency on the y-axis, and again, time is on the x-axis. And we have these three symbols on the top, which indicate the eyes closed, classical music, and drumming periods. And anywhere that you see those symbols moving forward, we're referring to each of those three states. And I've put this dotted box around the 30 to 45 hertz frequency band, where we found that gamma power was increased in shamanic practitioners compared to control participants only during drumming. So in this plot, we again have the shamanic practitioners in purple, and the control participants are in green. And you can see that gamma power is increased in those practitioners. Additionally, gamma power was also correlated with the domain of elementary visual alterations, which meant the greater the gamma power in shamanic practitioners, the higher the score on that ASC domain. And these findings are interesting because whenever I was discussing the different frequency bands earlier, I mentioned that alpha power is known to be decreased during the psychedelic state. And this is a pretty consistent finding, and frankly, we were also expecting to see a decrease in alpha during the shamanic state of consciousness. And so it's interesting that that's missing here, given that there is that overlapping phenomenology, and we only saw this increase in gamma power. And there are some previous studies with psychedelics that have found increased gamma, but it's by no means as widespread a finding as that depressed alpha. So right away, this suggests that despite overlapping phenomenology between these two states, there are some distinct changes in brain activity that are occurring. Next, we have functional connectivity, and similar to the previous slide, we're comparing this measure between shamanic practitioners and controls. So again, warmer colors indicate greater functional connectivity in shamanic practitioners, and cooler colors are greater functional connectivity in control participants. And I've put a dotted line around both the low alpha and low beta bands, and we found that low alpha functional connectivity was decreased in shamanic practitioners during both drumming and classical music, but functional connectivity in the low beta band was increased in shamanic practitioners during classical music and shamanic drumming. And this highlights why it was so important that we had that classical music experiment here, because while there aren't differences in functional connectivity during the eyes closed period, there are during classical music, meaning these aren't changes that are specific to the shamanic state of consciousness, and rather may highlight some sort of trait-related change in shamanic practitioners, such as how they're processing auditory stimuli. Now we have Lempel-Ziv Complexity, which, as a reminder, is a surrogate for neural signal diversity that's just looking for the number of different patterns within the neural signal. And again, warmer colors are greater complexity in shamanic practitioners, and cooler colors are greater complexity in controls. And I put a dotted line around the 30 to 45 hertz frequency band again, which is the gamma band. And we found that there was decreased complexity in the gamma band during shamanic drumming in shamanic practitioners. Moreover, this was also correlated with the domain of insightfulness, where the lower the complexity in the gamma band, the higher the shamanic practitioners reported on the insightfulness domain. And this finding is also interesting because when I was discussing Lempel-Ziv complexity earlier, I mentioned that complexity is known to be increased during the psychedelic state, and here I'm showing a decrease. And one possible explanation for this is that in those previous studies, they were looking at broadband complexity, meaning that rather than computing complexity within delta, theta, alpha, etc., they're looking at complexity across all frequencies, such as 1 to 45 hertz. However, and I'm not showing this data today, but whenever we compared broadband complexity between shamanic practitioners and controls, we didn't see a difference, meaning that we're also lacking that increase in complexity during shamanic trance, and instead are just seeing this decrease in gamma complexity. So coupled with that lack of decrease in alpha power, this suggests again that despite overlapping phenomenology, the psychedelic state and shamanic trance have distinct changes in brain activity. Lastly, we have criticality. And as a reminder, we measured this using the pair correlation function, which I'll be abbreviating as PCF. And here, like all the other slides, warmer colors indicate greater PCF in shamanic practitioners, and cooler colors indicate greater PCF in controls. And I've put dotted lines around the low beta, high beta, and gamma bands, where we found a variety of findings. So first, we found that low beta PCF was increased in shamanic practitioners only during shamanic drumming. However, for high beta PCF, we found that shamanic practitioners had increased activity during both drumming and classical music. And in the gamma band, they had increased PCF across all 3 states. So this suggests that the changes in the low beta band are specific to shamanic trance, given that they're not happening in the other 2 states. But the changes in the high beta and gamma band, again, similar to functional connectivity, may hint at more trait-related changes, especially when we look at that gamma PCF, where even at baseline, even when these shamanic practitioners are just resting with their eyes closed, they have differences in brain activity compared to those control participants. However, in order to know if this is really a trait-related change, and this is a change in brain activity that's happening in shamanic practitioners over time, we would have to do some sort of longitudinal study to be able to see if their brain activity is indeed changing. And the last thing I wanted to say is that the low beta PCF increases are correlated with 2 different ASC domains. And so for the domains of complex imagery and elementary visual alterations, the greater the low beta PCF, the higher the score on these domains. And this makes sense because the low beta changes were the ones that were specific to shamanic trance, and the changes in the high beta and gamma band didn't correlate with any ASC measures, which, again, given that they happen during other states, also makes sense. And the last thing I wanted to go over today is how our findings of criticality relate to the entropic brain hypothesis. So the entropic brain hypothesis was put forth by Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris, who will be speaking later today. And there are a lot of different layers to this hypothesis, but I'm just going to briefly go over the ones related to criticality. And so according to the entropic brain, criticality exists within a normal waking consciousness exists within a critical zone rather than at a critical point. And this is represented by those red dotted lines that I hope you can see on the screen. And during psychedelics, brain functioning is shifted to the upper end of this critical zone. And that shift in brain functioning is accompanied by an increased susceptibility to internal and external perturbations. In other words, the brain becomes more sensitive to our internal set and our external setting. And this increased susceptibility leads to more diverse spatiotemporal patterns in brain activity, and in turn, a richer conscious experience. Our data from shamanic practitioners suggests that during shamanic trance, brain functioning is also shifted to the upper end of this critical zone, and this could be responsible for the richer conscious experience reported by our shamanic practitioners. Additionally, as I mentioned, even at baseline in the gamma band, there were increases in criticality in shamanic practitioners, which means that even at rest, these shamanic practitioners might have brain functioning shifted to the upper end of that critical zone. However, as I already mentioned, we'd have to do some sort of longitudinal study to actually verify if this was really occurring. So in summary, this was the largest and most comprehensive neuroimaging study of the shamanic state of consciousness to date, and we had an increased sample size and additional control conditions compared to previous studies. We found that shamanic trance was characterized by self-reported changes in experience, and that shamanic practitioners reported altered states of consciousness questionnaire scores that were similar to, and in some cases greater than, those reported by individuals who had received psilocybin, ketamine, or MDMA. Shamanic practitioners endured changes in EEG in a variety of measures, and that these correlated with those ASC domain scores. And we also found some evidence for some possible trait-related changes in shamanic practitioners as well. And then finally, these results overall suggest that despite similar phenomenology between shamanic trance and the psychedelic state, there are these distinct changes in brain activity that are occurring within each of them. And so with that, I would like to thank everybody who worked on the Shamanism project, especially Q Kim and Anshul Lee for helping with analysis, as well as Tarek Belbahar, Angela Colmenero, and Amanda Nelson for collecting data, and Stephanie Blaine-Rays, George Mashore, and Rick Harris for making this study possible and designing it, as well as George and Rick's guidance for me on this project. I'd like to thank the administration within my graduate program, which is the NGP, as well as my thesis committee. And I'd like to give a special thanks to the indigenous cultures, as well as shamanic healers and practitioners, and recognize that this work was made possible by the practices that were started by and still performed by indigenous cultures around the world. And I think that's just really important to take time to acknowledge. I'd also like to thank Tate Durda and Stephanie T for helping us design this study in a way that shamanic practitioners could enter the shamanic state of consciousness. So they were shamanic practitioners that worked with us personally on the study. I'd like to thank the Center for Consciousness Science at the University of Michigan, as well as the Chronic Pain and Fatigue Research Center, where I conducted some of this work. And finally, I'd like to thank everybody who made this conference possible. I know there's a lot of time and energy and people that goes into putting these conferences together, especially during a pandemic. And so I'd just really like to thank everybody for that, as well as the opportunity to speak today. And so with that, I thank everybody for their time and attention.
We'll take some questions now if you have any.
Hi, thanks. Great talk. I'm just curious about the recruitment process and what that was like and what the proportion of indigenous shamans that you recruited were versus other. Thinking about neo-shamanism movement more broadly and who sort of self-identifies as a shaman nowadays.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great question. So all of these were shamanic practitioners. We didn't recruit any indigenous shamans. That would be very difficult, especially you don't want to transport people out of their town and uproot them and study them. And so we had somebody, Tarek, who attended basically conferences for shamanic practitioners and would kind of advertise our study and see people who were interested. And so he did a lot of the work in being able to find people who were willing to let us study this amazing state of consciousness.
Thanks for the talk. It was very interesting. I have a question about the fact that you measure complexity with only observational methods, and I was wondering if you consider instead using perturbational methods like the ones by Massimini and Tononi, perturbational complexity index. And the reason why I'm asking this is because, especially in the slide with the Carl-Harris diagram, you showed that the push of criticality upwards seemed to be in the direction of increased entropy. And the incompressibility of the Lempel-Ziv complexity basically signals, so a higher score could be due to increased noise rather than increased information and complexity. So this has been shown that with perturbational approaches, we can take into account whether the increase in complexity is really due to noise or it's due to differentiation of states. So yeah, my question is just if you consider that one interesting thing to do, and second, well, sort of related question, whether that would bring you closer to measure increase or decrease in consciousness rather than just maybe entropy in the brain. Thank you.
No, that's a great question. I think that there are lots of different measures you can use for neural signal diversity, and I think Lempel-Ziv complexity is just one that's frequently used in our lab. It is possible that if we use different measures for entropy, we could see different changes, and I fully acknowledge that. For our measure of Lempel-Ziv complexity, we do normalize using phase randomized data. So at the very least, we're trying to make sure that we're not just simply reflecting changes in the power spectrum. So at the very least, we're kind of doing that. And can you remind me of your second question? I'm so sorry.
No, it was just that an increase in information rather than just an increase in entropy would maybe correlate better with an increase in consciousness rather than just, noise in the brain. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. Also possible. I think that really a lot of what we need to do is that so little study has been done on these non-pharmacologic states of consciousness. So it was actually even hard to think about whenever we're trying to characterize these different EEG measures. We don't really have anything to compare it to. Even I think there was only one study that I found that's looked at criticality during meditation. And so it's even hard to know, okay, what we're finding, what is it reflecting? And until some more studies get out there studying these non-pharmacologic states of consciousness, I think it'll be hard to know. But I agree that different investigations need to be done. And we still have a lot of data, so stay tuned.
Thanks. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. That was a really great talk. I enjoyed it. So I had a question about what your thoughts might be around mechanism. And I was wondering if you guys did any analysis on the actual drumming itself. So looking at the rhythms or the frequency of the drumming, and how you think that might be interacting with, if you think it's interacting with the body to create this state, and what your thoughts are about that.
Absolutely, that is a great question. So we've talked a little bit about, we didn't do it in the paper, but talked about sensory entrainment and this idea that if you do have these repetitive rhythms in drumming or what have you, how does that interact with brain rhythms actually? And whenever, there is something special about, like I said, listening to rhythmic drumming or rattles, and that enables them to enter this altered state. So a future direction we've talked about is trying to see, is there some connection between these rhythms that are happening externally and the rhythms that are happening internally? So definitely a really good question.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, what a great talk. What a great study. I focus on, my research focuses on non-pharmacologic ecstasy, peak experiences. So I look forward to talking with you. I actually have some PhD dissertations with me here. They'll be happy to share with you. And the wonderful thing about this conference is that I thought that the altered states that were induced by psychedelic therapies were very similar, and I'm discovering how much, they really are quite different. But you identify the same features as you find in the non-pharmacologic. I also wanted to say that bliss experiences are experienced by most people and always will be. And will always, most of them will always be non-psychedelic. But that being said, it's really interesting that we're talking about this as an altered state. So I really would like some help with the definition of an altered state, because, one might argue they're really not, this isn't an altered state, it's just a different state. But if it's an altered state, it's altered from what? Thank you.
No, I think that's a really good question that I've never, we throw around the term altered states of consciousness very frequently, and I don't really know, to my knowledge, if there's really strict criteria for what it has to be to meet that. I think that if we were going to try to define what an altered state of consciousness is, in my mind, thinking from a scientific perspective, I'd think, we have 11 domains, and say in 4 out of 11 domains you had to have altered scores. So if I had to actually think of a way to quantitatively evaluate what an altered state is, that's what I think. But I think that you make a really good point that other people can have these experiences on various of those domains. They might not have all of them together, they might not have 8 like shamanic practitioners, but that doesn't mean that they're not occurring. And it's also a reason that Michael Harner said that anybody can learn from these shamanic traditions and become a shamanic practitioner, because people can have these different states. So that was a great question.
We can take one more quick question.
Okay.
So this is great work. Thank you for this. I have a whole bunch of questions for you, but I'm going to stick to a question about, you alluded to there being this possible trait change in shamanic practitioners, and I'm curious, in sort of the behind the scenes part of you running this study, how much did you observe different individual diversity among the subjects that you found, and was there things that really stood out about certain individuals and the way that they would enter these states compared to some of the others? How consistent was it across these subjects? When did you start to suspect that there were these trait changes in the shamanic practitioners?
Yeah, no, so great question. So the trait, so I should clarify first that I didn't collect the data. There's a lot of other wonderful people that put in a lot of hard work to get that data, and I came in on the analysis end for wrapping up that project. And the trait-related changes were more related to what we saw with EEG, this idea that we're seeing changes that are occurring during shamanic drumming, as well as these other states like classical music or eyes closed. However, you raise an important point, which is that not every experience of every shamanic practitioner is the same, that just like the psychedelic state can vary a lot in terms of what people experience, there can be certain traits and themes, but everyone's experience is individual, just like everyone's experience in this room is individual to them. And that happens with shamanic practitioners too. And so different practitioners may enter the state at different rates. They may have a different dose of shamanic trance, such as some might have a more intense experience than others. And we did collect some written accounts of what shamanic practitioners experienced during the drumming period. And that's some data that we're trying to figure out the best way to analyze, because it is hard when you have a lot of written accounts and figuring out the best way to do that, similar to kind of dream reports. But there's a lot of diversity in that experience. But I would say that's a little unrelated to the trait-related changes. Those are more on the EEG end. But definitely the experience of shamanic practitioners can be quite diverse. So,
Very interesting. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to move on. She'll have to take your question later. Thank you. Sorry, we got to move on. Got to move on. Thank you so much. Sorry, we have to move on. Sorry, sir, we're going to have to move on. Okay. Oh, sure. You could ask her right after, sure.
I'm happy to talk to you offline, but we have to move on to the next talk. But I'm happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was really great. Our next speaker is calling in from the University of Liège, Charlotte Marshall. She's going to be joining us on Zoom, so we're going to pull her up. I believe it's about dinner time where she's calling from, so thank you for calling in at dinner time, Charlotte.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello, yes, we have you.
Perfect. Great. So I will first share my screen. You should now be able to see my slide. Is it okay?
Yes. Yep, we've got your screen and your slides.
Perfect. So hi everybody. I'm sad not be with you today, but still glad to present my favorite research topic, which is near-death experience. So here I will briefly introduce our recent study about NDE and briefly discuss how NDE as a state of disconnected consciousness may expand our understanding of human consciousness. So before to start, I will quickly introduce our team. So I'm part of the Coma Science group directed by Dr. Olivia Guthrie and Dr. Clinician and bioengineer working on consciousness and more particularly on disorder of consciousness. So our aim is to improve medical care of patients with disorder of consciousness. But we also work on other topics such as hypnosis, meditation, trance, and near-death experience. So currently, there is no common definition for NDE. However, we can, in research, use a scale in order to identify and characterize NDE. So we recently developed a new standardized scale called the Near-Death Experience Content Scale with my colleagues in order to better characterize NDE and facilitate empirical research. While there are many definitions, I can here define NDE as a profound psychological event with a prototypical mystical element feature typically occurring to people close to death. To give you an idea of the incidence of NDE, here are a few numbers. So we can see that about 20% of cardiac arrest survivors may report typical NDE, 3% of TBI survivors, and more generally in the general population, a few studies found that about 5% of the general population may report NDE. So the particularity of NDE is that they contain prototypical features such as the very famous out-of-body experience, seeing a bright light at the end of a tunnel, for example, and there are other kinds of prototypical features that can be identified with the near-death experience contact scale, or the scale developed by Professor Grayson, the near-death experience scale. So it's actually in 1975 that the terminology of NDE has been introduced into the English language by Professor Raymond Moody with this very famous book, Life After Life. Actually, this book, Professor Moody, collected about 150 NDE testimony of coma survivor. And since then, the phenomenon has reached a growing popularity with a countless number of books and other kind of work. However, if we have a look to if we have a look at the research on NDE, it is actually quite limited. So we can find today 366 publications on PubMed. However, we can see that for the last 10 years, there is an increase of interest on near-death experience. So by contrast to typical near-death experience, actually, a lot of people may report a similar phenomenology memory in non-life-threatening situations. We call them near-death-like experience. So this experience may occur in the context of, for example, meditation or while taking drugs. So this experience raised a puzzling question regarding the importance of life-threatening context for the occurrence of NDE. So quickly here you can see a graph where we compare classical NDE, so inside a context of a life-threatening situation, in comparison to non-life-threatening situations, so NDE-like. And actually, we did not find a significant difference between the prototypical feature of classical NDE. So this is one publication, but other publications show the same result. So recently, with our colleague, we also wanted to compare classical NDE with drug-induced psychedelic experience. So we took about 600 NDE written reports, and we also took written reports of drug-induced experience. Here we include 165, if I remember correctly, different substances. And we use natural language processing in order to study semantic similarity between NDE report and drug reports. So we had many results, but the most important finding is that we found that ketamine, that you can see here, was actually the most similar phenomenological experience in comparison to all other kind of drug experience that we include in this study. So you can see here a graph including all types of drugs we use, and you can see the ranking of all these drugs. On the left, you can see the lowest similarity, and on the right, you can see the highest similarity with NDE. And so our study suggests here that ketamine could be used as a safe and model for NDE phenomenology in laboratory setting. So we found very high similarity between ketamine narrative and NDE narrative. And this actually permits us to do the hypothesis that NDE endogenous NDE antagonism may be released in the proximity of death and triggering an NDE phenomenology. So this kind of study may help us to do hypotheses regarding the neurophysiological mechanism underlying NDE. So this was one study, and there are other kinds of study which investigate the similarity and potential difference between NDE and psychological drugs. Notably, the Imperial College London used DMT to induce similar subjective experience in healthy participants. And then we compare their subjective report with classical NDE, and we found an overlap between the prototypical feature in DMT subjective experience. We also use other kind of questionnaire to investigate other kind of feature typical in drug-induced experience. And we also observed that the experience of ego dissolution is actually one of the main feature of NDE. So to sum up, there are several studies showing the high similarity between NDE and drug-induced experience. And I really found that interesting because, of course, as a researcher, we are not there when people experience NDE, typical classical NDE. So we can use psychedelic or drugs such as ketamine to induce such subjective experience in laboratory setting to study the neurobiological mechanism. Here are also other kind of study where we found correlation between a brain region and the occurrence of a subjective experience, such as the sensation of presence. We know that if we stimulate the temporoparietal junction, the left temporoparietal junction, we can induce the sensation of presence in healthy participants. Same for out-of-body experience. In this very interesting study, the reader and colleagues show that if we stimulate this part of the brain, we can clearly induce an out-of-body experience. We also know that in hypercapnia, people may report features such as bright light, out-of-body experience, or other kind of mystical element. So actually, all this study help us to understand the underlying neurophysiological mechanism of NDE. So in a recent publication with my colleague, we sum up the main mechanism which should underlie NDE-like. So there is this hypercapnia, but we also know that in syncope, fainting, we can observe NDE-like. So we know that the decrease of oxygen may induce prototypical feature of NDE. As I said before, some neurotransmitter may be involved. Endorphin may be also released in the proximity of death to induce such intense subjective experience. And based on the recent empirical study, we found a few brain regions that you can see here related to the occurrence of NDE phenomenology. And in the NDE literature, there is actually a lack of a structure framework to analyze and define NDE. So it's why recently with my colleague, we suggested to use these three components to define NDE and compare them with other kind of subjective experience or altered state of consciousness. So we suggested to use wakefulness, internal awareness, so all kind of subjective experience, and connectedness that we define here as the connection to the environment, permitting the experience of external stimuli. So you can see here many states, many conditions. I won't I won't define them and discuss all of them, but I will focus here on NDE, but like that you can show how we compare NDE and NDE-like with other kind of altered state of consciousness. So if you are awake and in a normal conscious state, all these three components should be relatively high. By contrast, in a coma or general anesthesia without a subjective experience, the three components are very low. And for near-death experience, we can observe that there is, of course, the presence of internal awareness. So it is a subjective experience that we experience while we are in a condition where the level of wakefulness is relatively low. So such as cardiac arrest or some TBI, or it can be also under general anesthesia, etc. For ND-like, it is actually a group more heterogeneous. So we can see here that people may report ND-like when they are fully awake, full internal awareness, and a connection to the environment, such as high fever or anxiety. But we can also observe that ND-like are reported in other kind of contexts, such as meditation or syncope, where actually people are in a more critical situation and less aware of their environment and sometimes not awake. So currently we see that NDE may be reported from all parts of the world. And actually this universality suggests maybe that there is a biological origin and purpose of this NDE. So recently, with our colleague from Denmark, we suggested the hypothesis that thanatosis, so that feigning, which is a defense mechanism in animal, could be the evolutionary origin of NDE. So we here found that thanatosis occur actually at all major nodes in animal. And we also suggested that the acquisition of language in humans may have transformed this behavior in a more complex experience, so a rich perception that we can now call NDE. And actually, we also do the hypothesis that NDE may offer a more intelligible and less distressing reality when people are close to death or in a situation of danger. So it is the first time we suggest this hypothesis, But of course, we here lack of empirical data, but we wanted here to discuss more the evolutionary origin of NDE and its potential biological purpose. So here, quickly, here are the take-home message, I would say. So NDE literature is an emerging field of research. I'm very happy to see that more and more researchers are motivated to study this fascinating topic. And actually more and more people contacted us telling us that they experience ND like in many different kind of non-life-threatening situations. So I hope here we will have more research in order to better describe those fascinating experience. And so we saw here a few studies trying to reproduce ND-like feature in laboratory setting. And I really hope here that this will help the ND literature to define the underlying mechanism. So based on our study, ketamine could be one of the most interesting candidates to model ND in laboratory setting. And so we just saw our recent hypothesis about potential evolutionary origin of NDE. And to conclude, NDE can be considered as a state of disconnected consciousness. And I think this state can clearly help to expand our understanding about human consciousness, notably by comparing those experiences to other kind of subjective experience or other kind of altered state of consciousness. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like also to tell anyone who have experienced NDE that they can contact us to share their testimony. We have now about 2,000 of testimony, and we need more for our future research. I would like also to thank all my colleagues and international collaborators. So thank you so much, and thanks here, the Center for Consciousness Study, for the invitation, and I wish you a great conference.
Right. Thank you so much, Charlotte. That was great. We have some time for some questions, so we'll take those. And let me know if you can't hear him, Charlotte.
Yeah, sure. I can hear you.
Okay, go ahead, Dr.
Hello,
Herman.
that was a great talk. Thank you so much. A number of people have died while being recorded with an EEG in the ICU, various other places in medicine. Sometimes full EEGs, but usually modified EEGs like we use in anesthesia to measure depth of anesthesia. And in these cases, as the patient dies, as the heart rate slows and eventually stops and the blood pressure goes down, the EEG, or the idiot number that the streamlined EEG machines use, the BIS or the SedLine, dwindles down almost to zero. And then in about 50% of cases, there's a burst of EEG activity that, when analyzed, is high frequency, highly coherent gamma EEG. And this has been reported, like I said, in about 50% of patients in ICUs and in other patients. Do you have any comment on that? Have you? We had this presented at our conference years ago, and there was another case report that just came out, so we may revisit that. Have you encountered the high frequency gamma at the time of death? I think she's gone.
And it was such a good question.
Well, I have my opinion.
Hi.
Did you hear my question?
Now no, actually the connection cut, sorry. So I hear the beginning, but not the end. I think there is a connection trouble.
Let me just repeat very briefly. A number of people in hospitals have died while being recorded with EEG, including very simple EEG machines that we use in the operating room to measure depth of anesthesia. And in about 50% of cases, at the time of death, based on when the heart rate goes to zero and the blood pressure drops precipitously, the EEG activity, or the idiot number that these machines give us, dwindles down to zero. But then there's a burst of activity lasting from 30 seconds to a couple minutes in the high gamma EEG frequency range, which, as you know, correlates with consciousness. And then it goes away. And the family members have taken this as a sign of the patient's soul leaving the body and going to heaven. People have tried to explain it with hypoxia, but that makes no sense because hypoxic patients are agitated and these patients are unconscious anyway. So I just wondered if you had any comment on that.
Yes, thank you. So I hear you well. That's great. So yes, of course, I am aware of these few studies, notably one very recent that was published like a few months ago, and showing gamma activity, a peak of gamma activity in a person dying. So here, yes, a big question of the NDE literature remains that we still don't know exactly when they experience the subjective experience. So it can be just for example, in the context of a cardiac arrest, it can be just before, during, or after. But indeed, we have 2 studies or 3, I don't remember, showing this gamma surge, this gamma peak, and of course we can do the hypothesis that the rich subjective experience may be experienced during this gamma peak. But of course we need more and more study to better characterize those findings, and we need more empirical data. But yes, thanks for your interesting comment.
One more brief comment. My former chairman, at the time of when a patient died in the operating room from trauma, would give ketamine, and I asked him why. He said, send him off to heaven. So that's been my practice too when that tragic situation occurs. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Hi, Charlotte. I wonder if you have any comments on the order in which these experiences happen. As you know, I had a ND light experience, and it went in the classic order of tunnel, light, out-of-body experiences, other worlds, borders, you know. And I'm fascinated for a very long time as to why there should be that order. Do we have any underlying physiological or endocrinological answer? Maybe there's some cascade of neurotransmitters or something. Do you have any data or any theory about why there tends to be this similar order?
Okay, thanks. So nice to see you here. Happy to discuss with you again. Actually, no, I don't have a clear answer to you because that's quite complicated to study the order of these different features. So in laboratory, it's very difficult because, well, I think one way to study that question would be to, as I said, induce subjective experience resembling ND in laboratory, and asking people about the order, and then trying to correlate them with the neurophysiological mechanism. However, I'm also afraid that here we would be limited by like the memory factor.
Oh.
The memory would have been disturbed a bit. To the best of my knowledge, there is no other study that the one we did checking the order in the narrative. So we don't have more evidence about neurobiological mechanism. And
something for the future.
Yeah, I hope we
Thank you.
can do that. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Charlotte, thank you for that presentation. That was really interesting. I was particularly struck by your use of NLP to distinguish between the near-death experiences and the different psychedelic experiences. And I was wondering if you had any intuition or any findings as to why ketamine specifically was much more similar phenomenologically to the near-death experiences as opposed to the classical serotonergic psychedelics. If they have any kind of idea of what about ketamine in terms of the pharmacology or the mechanism, why that one is so similar to the NDEs?
That's a good question. Actually, we hope one day to do a ketamine study in our laboratory and more explore that question. I guess that as I said, in the proximity of death, we can have such endogenous substance which has the same mechanism as ketamine, NMDA ketamine antagonism in our body, and then this would induce a near-death experience, near-death experience phenomenology. But that's still hard to say more at that stage. However, this is interesting because we know a bit about the ketamine functioning in the brain, and then we can do hypothesis, but for sure, as I said, we are not there while people experience NDE. So I'm afraid this will remain some hypothesis.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So like the running hypothesis being that it's a ketamine-like molecule that's released endogenously at the time of death?
Yes, I mean,
okay.
This is one of our hypotheses, yes, yeah.
Cool, that's really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Sorry if I missed, but can you expand on the evolutionary reasoning behind like a mechanism for near-death experiences? Like, is it that the individual trauma is reduced as perceived by the group, so the group is less fearful of individual death to facilitate group-oriented evolutionary trends?
Thanks for your question. Indeed, so the idea would be that here NDE would serve as a mechanism to face this stressful experience, and one of the intriguing feature of NDE is that most of the NDE, at least that we have in our database, are very positive. So even if people were in a life-threatening situation, they report very positive experience, and after that, maybe you are aware of that, people usually report to be less afraid to die, etc. So we here think that NDE could serve as a mechanism to face a stressful or very dangerous situation, and then the humans will experience a very rich perception with this sensation of less distressing reality. So this is one of our hypotheses, and this is of course related to all dissociation study, where we can see that dissociation is a defense mechanism in humans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, my question is similar to the one I was going to ask previously, which is how do we get out of the subjective realm to give substantiation to some of these experiences, spiritual, less afraid, rich perception. We're throwing out these words about the experience based solely on first-person perspective. I feel that it was enormous. Now, I've not had these experiences. Maybe they are enormous and so forth. Is there a way to validate any of the subjectivity of reports?
Sorry, the connection is cutting a bit. Sorry, but the connection cut. Can you repeat the question? So you ask here if the subjective experience could be validated.
Yeah, the words used to describe them: disconnected consciousness, sensations of presence, ego dissolution. Now, I mean, these are descriptions from that are supposedly about what is subjectively experienced. But is there a way to validate that there is actually a spiritual reaching or an insightfulness of what? I mean, we're talking outside of the experience.
Sure. This is, of course, a very interesting question, and I'm not sure we will have the answer here at this conference. But yes, of course, I think that here, currently, we, as a researcher, we depend on the technology we use. So, for example, we use EEG, MRI, PET, etc. And those kind of technique may limit our understanding of consciousness. So in the case of NDE, I think the subjective experience is one of the most important thing to explore, because we will never know what they really experience. But I think one way would be to correlate, as we try to do, one way to be would be to correlate the report, the subjective report, with objective measure that we can, for example, have with EEG or neuroimaging technique. But as I said, of course, we are very limited because we use that technique that measure a precise thing. So I'm not sure that currently we could be able to go further.
Authenticate.
I would say that we need other technique to expand this this understanding of the subjective experience. I don't know if I answer your question, but I think it's a very hard question.
At least when a person says he's not afraid to die after that, that's some indication something happened. Yes.
True.
Okay.
Indeed.
All right. Thank you so much. That was so fascinating, Charlotte.
Thank you.
All right, and our last speaker is Elizabeth Krasnoff, who's speaking on something that's super interesting to me, binaural beats and their effects on human consciousness and the human nervous system. Very much looking forward to this.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Great. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Emma. Emma, you did a lot of my work for me, so my definitions are going to go a lot faster. So my name's Elizabeth Krasnoff, and it's a great honor to be here presenting with you all. The umbrella of my work is really sound, healing, and consciousness. So we've heard a lot of amazing science and data. Let's just take a moment and just breathe. You have a gallon of blood. It comes through your heart. Every 60 seconds, you can completely oxygenate your blood by breathing. But I use sound, so just kind of place your hand on your heart, or just place your awareness on your heart and just make the sound ah. It's the sound of the heart. Ah. And just like that, we're all here. Just like that. The power of sound. So, binaural beats, yes. This presentation is an overview of the field of binaural beats. This is my doctoral dissertation. My chair was Alan Leslie Combs, who is known in the field of consciousness studies. I did work with a physicist as well. You can't really treat sound properly without physics. And then Alfonso was my transdisciplinary mentor. I took a transdisciplinary approach. I wanted to summarize this field first before I did any work in it, because we know so little about it. What is it actually? So I specifically looked at the effects of binaural beats on consciousness and the human nervous system, a transdisciplinary review. A little bit about me. First of all, I'm half deaf. I'm hearing impaired. If any of you talk to me afterwards, please look right at me. I lip read. I wear hearing aids. And I think that really started this whole inquiry for me, my invisible disability, really owning that and starting to understand it. That led to 35 years of study. It led to a PhD in the science of sound. It led to a certification in sound healing and sound therapy, in energy medicine. I'm a shamanic practitioner. Can I be in your next study? I'm a heart math practitioner. So I use biofeedback a lot with my clients. And I started a business 2015 called Sound Medicine, where I treated patients using those modalities and sound. And herein lies my conflict of interest. I do use binaural beats in my practice. And they were so effective for both my clients and me that I began to study them. Okay? And at the end, I'll talk about my pilot study. And I did control for that by I was not at the study at the time that it happened, and all the tracks were blind, so nobody knew what was what. Okay, let's get going. There'll be an introduction. I'll discuss the methodology I used for the overview of the field, and then we'll have conclusions. I'll talk about my pilot study and some future recommendations. First, we'll just look at the purpose of the study. I'll give you some context and some brief definitions. But I wanted to start with this slide, a recent article that came out. The newest psychedelic drug is sound. So people are starting to use binaural beats to get high. This data was from a global drug survey in 2021. 30,000 people in 22 countries, including the US, showed that, yes, 72% of respondents are using binaural beats to help relax or sleep. 35% are trying to change their mood, and 12% are now saying they're using them to create the same high they get from taking a psychedelic drug. That's very interesting. So someone asked, well, what is an altered state of consciousness? For my talk, I'm going to define the basic state of consciousness as basic beta everyday state. We're in production mode, we're here, we're listening, we're producing. That's our everyday state. And so changing from that would be an alteration, slowing that down or speeding it up. And again, 16% of respondents from the US say they've tried it. That's a big number. So in my study, what I wanted to do was provide an overview of this field, especially for professionals in sound healing. I wanted to look at the three major disciplines that are studying binaural beats, and that is health, neuroscience, and psychology. And then I reviewed 26 studies for 18 experimental conditions, and then I made recommendations. So what are binaural beats? That's the big question. What are they? They're a difference tone created by two slightly different pitches. I call them a biohack or a brain hack, right? We're trying to change the state of consciousness in our brain with this sound, with this pressure wave. So let me just break that down for you. If we use 440 hertz, which is A, actually, and we put 440 in the left ear and put a difference tone of 448 in the right ear, that difference tone of 8 hertz is what the brain perceives. It's invisible. You don't hear it. It happens only in your head. And that 8 hertz is what we are looking to resonate with the brain and create that wave in the brain and the correlative state of consciousness. Dr. Gerald Oster published the first really big study on this about 50 years ago in Scientific American. Before that, we didn't believe that they existed. And Actually, many people still don't. But one thing I want to let you know is that we have a binaural hearing pathway in our brain. It's how we locate sound. It exists. So the question is, can we use this pathway to alter states of consciousness? Can it affect our brain states, our autonomic nervous system, our well-being, our conscious awareness, or synchronize our brain hemispheres, which is very interesting for many reasons. So in order to assess the effect potential of binaural beats, I wanted to know, will this affect the neural brain rhythms, the same ones that Emma discussed, and can we predict the influence on the autonomic nervous system, right? So how are we going to measure that? And someone asked, how can you validate subjective experience? I find in the field of binaural beats that it's really useful to have both quantitative and qualitative tools. So the most popular, of course, is EEG, tracking the electrical activity on the scalp. Functional connectivity, that's very interesting. Tracking the activity between the brain regions. I believe that that is probably going to give us a lot of information. I mean, I have to say, we don't know a lot. We don't know much of what's happening in this field. We're just at the beginning. But I think that these are going to be our best bets, especially the third one, multi-layer perceptron networks. It's an artificial neural network that can be applied to EEG readings to measure complex nonlinear data. The hearing brain is so complex. The brain is so complex. How can we have complex enough tools to measure what's actually happening? And so in these studies, these are the three most successful quantitative tools. For the autonomic nervous system, we have tools like heart rate variability, so that's measuring your cardiovascular system. Galvanic skin response, that can measure the intensity of your response by the moisture in your skin. And then our semi-quantitative or qualitative tools, all the usual questionnaires, which actually will differ per discipline. Like in neuroscience, you're asking different questions than in health, where you might be a dentist wanting to know if the anesthesia, if you need less or more anesthesia, which again might be different from a cognitive test, which is the next category. Cognitive tests and tasks, often used in questions of memory, focus, and attention, and then self-reporting. So you put those together with the quantitative tests, and you can start to see correlations. So when we say we're measuring the electrical activity on the scalp, we're measuring these basic frequencies, right? And this is a more sophisticated audience, but when I'm explaining this to someone that doesn't really study the brain or consciousness, I just liken it to the gears of the car. If you ever drove a manual car, you have first gear, second, third, fourth, fifth. This is the same thing. You start in slow gear and you move up to fast gear. And those are the correlative states of consciousness that we have measured. So, context. Emma talked a lot about this. We have been using repetitive rhythms like drumming and dancing and chanting as a healing modality since before written history. We do have studies. We now have more studies, as you saw in this room. And we know that rhythmic repetition entrains the brain. Now, this is going to be a big point in this talk, entrainment. We know that rhythm entrains the brain, but do binaural beats entrain the brain? Everyone refers to them that way, but I'm going to suggest that it is not, that it is something different. And again, we first noticed the repetitive rhythms of binaural beats in 1839 by German physicist H.W. Dove, and our modern investigations continued with Gerald Oster in 1973. So, this is one of my favorite slides. The way we hear is some kind of miracle. All around you are these invisible pressure waves that you have to decode. Is it going to eat me? Do I have to run away? Can I mate with it? Can I eat it? All these things, that's encoded in the vibrations around you. And this incredible apparatus takes and decodes that information. And it goes through 4 energy transductions. You don't hear in your ear here, you hear in your brain. So, you start out here with the airwaves, then you go in, there's a Morse code, a tapping, right? So then that's a mechanical energy. It goes into the cochlea. Then you have water, you have water waves. So that was our original state. I've heard Dr. Nina Kraus, a neuroscientist who I just interviewed in the field, talk about how this is maybe the remnants of our primordial beginnings, the water in our ear, and where sound is transduced and communicated in its most effective way. And so then the next step, you'll go from, okay, so now we're coming in this ear here. We can look at the diagram, right? We've come in through. The fourth step is it goes from the cochlea into the brainstem, and now it's electrical. Right? So when we're talking about binaural beats, we're talking about how to deliver electricity to the brain, right? So regular sound will just come right up that brainstem, the cochlear nucleus, which are the blue dots, the superior olivary nuclei, those are the green dots, and the inferior colliculus, the orange dots. Then it comes up medial geniculate nucleus. And so then it comes up and it passes left out to the cortex. So that's where you hear your auditory cortex on the side of your head. That's why it feels so good to massage there, especially for us deaf people who struggle to hear all day long. And but we don't know the pathways of binaural beats. We don't know. We have science that shows us as far as the superior olivary nuclei. Those are the green dots. And we, again, locate them out at the auditory cortex, which is the red dots on this slide. But we don't know what happens in between. We just have speculation. And the speculation is that data is going into the reticular activating system, a non-primary auditory pathway. And this is also where we process all our sensory information. It's kind of the triage center where your brain tells you what to pay attention to. The auditory brain, by the way, goes to all centers of the brain. It goes to your thinking brain, your feeling brain, your moving brain. It goes everywhere. And so there's a relationship there with that reticular activating system of what do I listen to? What do I pay attention to? Is it time to move? Is it time to run? Is it time to eat? What's happening? So the theory is, well, maybe that's where the binaural beats are being processed, right? And those are the three sleep arousal states, the three states of consciousness that the reticular activating system governs. It's like a gateway. You have deep sleep, you have slow wave resting, mid, sort of meditative state, and then you have waking. So what's interesting about this is that this all relates to the hypothalamus. Look at what the hypothalamus regulates. Look at what the autonomic nervous system regulates. All of these systems, all of these neural pathways feed into the next set of neural pathways, right? So you've got on the left-hand side of the slide, the endocrine system, pituitary gland, metabolic processes, body temperature. I'm not going to read through them all. Circadian rhythms. And then this is affecting your autonomic nervous system, heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate. So what's interesting to me is, well, if we don't know the pathways, can we look at what's happening to the body when it's under effect of binaural beats? And by looking at those pathways and what's happening, maybe that will give us information to go back and study the pathways of the signal. Because those sure do correlate to the 5 brain states that we're measuring, right? From slow to fast. You start with the sleep, those are your delta and theta. You move up slow wave, alpha, beta, gamma for the higher states. So let's take a look now at some sound healing terms, just to get on the same page before we pull this all together. In sound healing, for us, vibration is an oscillation, basically the same thing as physics. Movement back and forth across a midpoint. Frequency is how fast the vibration moves. I always get a kick out of, everybody talks about frequency. What is frequency? Well, frequency is just how fast in a second the cycle is, right? Well, I mean, if you think about it, we're measuring speed. We're just measuring speed. And a slow brainwave is one state of consciousness, and a faster brainwave is another state of consciousness. Pretty fascinating. Energy, we'll just say it's the power to do work, represented by vibrations. And rhythms are patterns of oscillation in time. And consciousness, I will not be so bold as to define consciousness, but just for this presentation, we'll just say it's an awareness, the creation of a relationship. Once I'm aware of you and you're aware of me, our relationship grows. So a great definition of sound healing to work with is the educated and conscious use of the energy of sound to reach identified goals and promote wellness in the human system, including the expansion of consciousness. So we're looking at binaural beats in the context of sound healing. Now, in sound healing, there are two main principles, the principles of entrainment and the principles of resonance. Now, in physics, it's a much more complicated equation, but for sound healing, we're just going to use these simple definitions. Now, at the basis of this is an understanding of how the human body uses energy. We are a battery. We can't use all our energy up. We want to be efficient, right? So how are we using that energy? Entrainment, if any of you ride a bike, it's kind of like drafting. When you draft behind the cyclist in front of you and you train on their energy, right? You're using less energy. They showed that with pendulums, okay? One rhythm takes over another rhythm, causing it to synchronize, and less energy is expended by the system. So our binaural beats entrainment. Now, none of the studies that I've looked at have found a high enough signal to show entrainment. So the theory right now is that it's possibly a resonance. Resonance is just an increase of amplitude when an input matches the natural frequency of a system. That's the example of when an opera singer sings into a glass and breaks the glass, right? That's an explosion, just the energy becomes too big for the system and it melts back into its previous state. So what I and the physicist on my dissertation committee thought this was looking more like, it is more plausible that this is some form of stochastic resonance. Binaural beats seem to be like a signal enhancer. There needs to be a signal there, and the binaural beats come in and enhance it. So we're going to think of it, we're going to suggest that it is possibly more of a resonance phenomenon. I know people in the field have not liked that theory. Some people have. We're only at theories at this point. That's on my list of experiments to do. Okay, so we went in, we did a transdisciplinary review. We looked at the data of what was available in the field so far, and looked at really where we are right now is how do we design a good binaural beats study? How do we all get on the same page with this so that we can compare our results? Transdisciplinarity is an approach to exploring many parts of the whole to deliver an integrated perspective on existing research. It's basically you have a question and you go to as many fields of discipline as you need to answer your question. You're not a specialist in one field. And so, which is great for binaural beats because this is very complex, as is the hearing brain. I wanted to integrate the research from these different fields, and I wanted to integrate the quantitative and qualitative research onto a continuum, and to integrate the study of the mind-body energy field. So these are the databases that I searched, all the standard databases. And there was way more studies than I thought there would be. And there's another 10 since I published this study. Some really interesting things are happening in the field right now. Those were my main keywords. I was stuck for a while trying to find sound healing because there's no research under the field of sound healing. It's all under the field of sound therapy or music therapy, right? It's a code. You have to have the right code to go into the matrix. So the studies, the criteria for selecting the studies, they had to use binaural beats to affect the brain or nervous system. They had to be published in a major peer-reviewed journal within the last 6 years, and they had to have at least 12 of my 18 data points. These are the 26 studies that I selected in the 3 fields of neuroscience, psychology, and health. And health, by the way, includes sports medicine, dentistry, all of that is under that field. The overview of the material included basic voting, sorting, comparison, and identifying emerging patterns. And it was quite a work, because everybody was kind of doing a different thing based on which field they came from. So you have to understand, we're studying sound here, but it's neuroscientists using this technology, or people from the health field, or people from cognitive psychology, very different uses of the same technology. As a matter of fact, Dr. Oster originally saw binaural beats as an excellent diagnostic for studying the brain pathways. This was not originally thought of as a healing modality or tool. So I'm going to look at just 6 of the outcomes today: the study outcomes, methods of measurement, brain frequencies, duration of binaural beats, inter-individual differences, and relaxation protocols, just to give you a sense. These were the 18 data points that I compared. And each of these points is kind of a make or break. You know, you have to be able to have comparison on each of these data points, which many people did not cover. Some people didn't even report the level of sound that they administered the binaural beats at. So, which kind of answers the next slide: why do 20 of the studies show effect and 6 do not? I just want to say to you, the studies that don't work are as important as the studies that do work. We know that here in this room. We have to investigate. We have to see what this tool is, what it can do, and what it can't do. It's really hard to see the press take a line out of one study and blow it out. Oh, something. We're having a lot of that these days. So these are the 6 studies that did not work. And we're going to come back to this, actually. I'll talk a little bit about why I think they could have been designed differently. But this is what the table looked like, right? So the first study author, Jirikitayakorn and Wansawat, they had 2 excellent studies. I covered pretty much everything you need to know if you were a binaural beats researcher and you wanted to construct a study and you wanted to know what other people had done and what was successful and why not, if it wasn't. So I'll take you through one of these lines, the Jirikitayakorn and Wansawat study. So they studied delta. The brain state was a sleep state that they were looking for. They used a 250 hertz carrier. The carrier is that the signal that's carrying the binaural beat. So if their delta was 3 hertz, I don't know, maybe they put 250 in one ear and 250 in the other ear. 250 hertz, to give you an idea, on the piano, that's middle C. And I wrote something down here for you, which I think is fascinating. So to give you an idea of how slow sound is, right, so what is 1 hertz? That's your heartbeat. Your heartbeat once every second, if you're at 60 beats per minute, right? That's really slow. So this is 3 hertz. Your brain, all these hertz that we're talking about, these are all cycles of 40 and lower for gamma 40. I mean, there's more, but of what we're discussing today. Okay, violet light, the speed of violet light, many of you probably know this, 7.5 times 10 to the 14th hertz. That's how fast light is and how slow these brain waves are, right? We're really grounded and connected into this earth. So in this study, they gave 1 repetition for 5 hours. A sleep study would have a longer time frame at a decibel level of 60, and it's 24 participants, 11 female, average age 24.5 7.12, and the study found that it did support sleep. Okay? And so this is a really great example of how to mix your markers, EEG, EOG, and EMG, those are all quantitative, and BRUMS, which is qualitative. And those findings correlated. So this is an example of a really good study. This is what we want to see. Okay. Brainwave frequencies. Most people studied theta, which is very popular because that's the trance brainwave. But I do want to say, we all know this, right? All these brainwaves are present. Each of the cavities of your brain, each of the places in your brain produce brainwaves. All these brainwaves are happening at the same time. We're talking about top notes, you know, like a wine that kind of has an oaky flavor. So we're talking about a brain that kind of has the theta band is more pronounced. But all those other frequencies are there. The other thing that's interesting about this slide is that there's very few studies that are using multi-layered binaural beats, and those are found to be the most effective because they are more emblematic of what's happening in our brain. Actually, the most research we have on this is really on meditators. A lot of people have studied the brain states of meditators. You'll all know all those studies. That's been happening for a long time. C. Maxwell Cade published that whole book with the beautiful pictures of the different brain waves that you could see in a state of peak meditation, right? So that has to work together with this field. This one is the measurement most frequently taken. So as you can see, we're kind of still apples to oranges. Some people are studying neural brain waves. Some people are studying the autonomic nervous system. A few people will study both. And then some people are studying other. That's largely from the health field. So again, that's a challenge when we want to get our repetition to know if we're actually getting the effect we want. Now, this was important, minutes exposed to binaural beats. Garcia Argibay had an excellent statistical analysis, I think, of 30 binaural beat studies with all the effect sizes and everything. And his meta-analysis showed that you really need 8 to 10 minutes of exposure to binaural beats to get the effect that you want. And I've seen that in 2 or 3 other studies. And as you can see here, so many of the studies are under the 8-minute mark. And often those are the studies that didn't get effect. All right, this is an important one, relaxation protocol. So the study that I really like to talk about with this slide had 109 participants. It was done in Szeged in Hungary, where my father is from. And it did find that alpha-theta binaural beats are capable of inducing a trance if the proper instructions were given. Right? We all know Monroe over at the Monroe Institute was using binaural beats for part of his protocol to send people into deep states of meditation and even astral projection. Well, that to me sort of comes back to the point that binaural beats are enhancing existing brainwaves. They're enhancing something. What are they enhancing? If you are suggesting to yourself instructions, right, are you setting the brainwaves into a certain condition by relaxing yourself and relaxing your breathing, and those brainwaves start, and then the binaural beats come in and enhance them? Is that how that's working? That's a question. But we find that on the studies where they do have a suggestion protocol, you have more effect. And yet you can see most people did not use a relaxation protocol. I mean, we should have a standard script, quite frankly. So just to tie this all up together, why are there studies with no results? Do the marketing claims have any basis? By the way, if you go on YouTube right now and Google binaural beats, you will get 41 million hits. So, you know, the secret is out. Do the marketing claims have any basis? That's what I'm interested in. My 3 emergent themes from my study. I'll just quickly look at the pilot study that I did and some recommendations for future research. These are the 6 studies with no effect. And what I really looked at here was some had insufficient time exposure, some had incorrect frequency chosen for the task. Like they chose a theta frequency for a focusing cognitive task. And so it's important to know that theta is not really going to help you focus. You're going to need more beta or gamma for a more focusing effect. And then, there's another really interesting thing I wanted to talk about, inter-individual differences. So the Redick study, she reported that personal qualities such as introversion and extroversion make a difference. So a more introverted person is more likely to have effect from binaural beats than an extroverted person. And this is a much larger topic, which is essentially that every sound brain is different, just like every brain is different. And our sound brain is the sum of our lifetime of experiences. So you can't have one thing for everybody. We just don't work that way. Really, and this is one of my recommendations, what's needed is a personalized diagnostic, right? How do we do that? How do we bring together all of the technology and understanding and create a personalized diagnostic that remains accessible, inexpensive, right? All those things come together. Another interesting thing, Oster and several other study authors found that there is an effect, a correlation between the endocrine system and the effect of binaural beats. So therefore, a woman before menopause and after menopause will react differently to binaural beats and will react differently per her monthly endocrine cycle, right? So one of these studies just had 20 women who were 50 years old. I was like, that's not enough of a variation given that there is an endocrine component here. And it also raises questions of, well, can this be used to help study those things? All right, claims that are evidence-based, right? We're not going to say proof yet. The field is young, but there is sufficient evidence building. Out of 26 studies, 20 had positive findings that binaural beats affect our brain states and autonomic nervous system. 2, binaural beats enhance our conscious awareness and meditation. We were able to see that. And binaural beats synchronize our brain hemispheres. We were able to see that. And that's largely looking with functional connectivity. Binaural beat affect our well-being in the following areas. And see, again, remember that slide where we talked about the effects of the signal pathway going through the thalamus and affecting the autonomic nervous system. Are we seeing any of the systems in that pathway affected here? And yes, we are, right? The whole nervous system is a rhythm. This is all rhythms. We are all rhythms. Your heart is the drum. The cells in your heart they are coupled oscillation. They are oscillating together. They must be attached and beat together. If they stop beating together, we die, right? So at the core of our life there is a coupled oscillation, is a rhythm that must continue. So nervous system, endocrine system, cardiovascular system, all rhythms. Are they affected? 4 studies had positive effects for sleep, the sleep rhythm. That's your circadian rhythm. Anxiety, stress, brain function, attention, cognition, memory, nervous system, trance meditation, and analgesic. So there is evidence in these categories. The emergent themes that I thought were most interesting were integration of brain hemispheres. This is an opportunity to explore the therapeutic benefits of synchronization. We all know EMDR, a wonderful therapy that you can use to link your brain hemispheres and access trauma and heal. Also, neurologic music therapy, Michael thought, is a force in that field, if anyone's interested in that. Anything having to do with rhythm, definitely add sound to your toolkit. Parkinson's, stroke, all those things are being treated with sound right now. Brainwaves are a field effect. Opportunity to study energy fields in the brain and neural consciousness. I remember the early consciousness studies pioneer John Roy, probably many of you know his work. All right, that whole field theory of consciousness. Every time I'm studying the auditory brain, it always seems to me to be a perfect metaphor and mirror for the general study of consciousness. Indeed, it's not separate, right? None of this is separate. None of the hearing processes are separate, and none of our senses are separate from consciousness. 3, and again, that multi-layer perceptron. I know Leslie, my chair, he's skeptical about the AI and the multi-layer perceptron. I don't know, I'm excited about it. If you know more about that, come talk to me. Binaural beats are perhaps a stochastic resonance technology. So this is an opportunity to expand the horizon of vibrational medicine, which if any of you ever read Gerber's book, really everybody attributes this to Einstein. This is the beginning of Einstein's research and impact on the world, the understanding of vibration as medicine. Binaural beats, you can study them in a lab. That's why I went ahead and chose this as my dissertation. It is possible to create variables. But we have to standardize our experimental protocols. We have to create a proper environmental protocol. We have to understand our natural fluctuations and multi-layer the binaural beat rhythms to actually match what's happening in our brain. Okay, my study. I did a double-blind controlled study, 4 participants, 2 women. The age range was 30 to 60 on 2 consecutive days at the same times. I tested a binaural beat alpha theta formula designed to produce a meditative state of consciousness. I created the tracks in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. They were labeled 1, 2, 3, 4 and sent to the lab, just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. Nobody knew what the tracks were. And the binaural beats were inaudible. Okay? So you wouldn't know if you were listening to them anyway, right? That was Dr. Oster's research. I really put my neck on the line here, and I said, Dr. Oster said, the studies show you don't have to hear them for them to be effective. So I put it all inaudible. All you heard was brown noise or music. My baseline condition, my control condition was basic brown noise. Second condition was brown noise and binaural beats. The third condition was my musical track plus brown noise. So my theory was that brown noise would be a nice carrier to kind of steady the binaural beat signal and carry it through, right? Because it's a multi-frequency sound. And then the last one, the pièce de résistance, the musical track plus brown noise plus binaural beats. And we used, I was in the SciTech labs, by the way, with Gaetan, the physicist who was my external committee member. We used GDV, gas discharge visualization, to measure the bioenergy. The EEG was measured with Wavy P300 brain mapping system. We used Menla-Scan for cardiovascular, ANS, body composition, microcirculation. We used the Big 5 inventory for character assessment, and we used a BMIS self-assessment. This is a very brief look, but I just wanted to show you one picture. First session, just the brown noise. This is on day 1. And the second session on day 1, just adding the binaural beats into the brown noise already created a calmer brain. Day 2, session 3, music and the brown noise. This showed some emotional activity, just listening to the music. Some emotions were brought up, is what this picture suggests, that green and yellow in that location. But then, when we added the binaural beats in the 4th track, the brain went entirely calm. So, all 4 subjects experienced an improvement in brain function, had a calmer brain after adding binaural beats to brown noise or to music plus brown noise. Most also showed an improvement in microcirculation or cardiovascular score after listening to the music plus brown noise and the binaural beats, probably due to relaxation. All of them showed an increase in bioenergy after adding binaural beats. This was pronounced. Binaural beats seem to have a profound effect on the physiology of subjects, and since it is not audible, these effects cannot be attributed to the placebo effect. These results are encouraging in terms of developing musical products, incorporating binaural beats to affect our neural rhythms and corollary states of consciousness, and warrant further research with more subjects and different frequencies of binaural beats and different music tracks. So if you were to walk away from here with anything, three key points to remember are that binaural beats, the difference in two frequencies, seem to resonate specific frequencies in the brain. Neural consciousness is a rhythmic state. You have sound medicine available to you at any moment in your phone and in your playlists. And three, informed selection and proper application of binaural beat frequencies seems to induce effects including correlative states of consciousness. If you want to try one, you can have one of mine for free at my website, sound-medicine.com. And I will now read to you every single one of my references. No, I will not. Thank you so much to Stuart and George for inviting me to participate here today. It was such a great honor. Thank you to Abby for everything and everything and everything. And to the University of Arizona Center for Consciousness Studies, who's doing such important work. And I've been coming here for a couple years, and I just feel that this is really a great moment in time for those of us who study consciousness, right? Do you feel this not expanding? And boy, are we needed. Boy, are we ever needed. Look at all you beautiful people. Thank you so much for listening to me today. Okay. So remember the hearing thing.
Hi. So on the topic of transdisciplinary studies, I'm wondering if you are aware of or if you plan to do any collaborations utilizing binaural beats in conjunction with psychedelics. And there's a reason why I'm saying this. I've heard Stuart Hameroff repeatedly in interviews talk about the idea that psychedelics boost resonances in microtubules. And they seem to set an environment that is particularly conducive to coherent resonance. And I've also heard Anirban Bandyopati speak a lot about a connection of beat frequencies correlating fundamental quantum level aspects of the universe all the way up to EEG, correlating terahertz oscillations all the way on up to hertz. So what am I saying? Beat frequencies seem to play a very important role here in fundamental aspects of consciousness. Psychedelics seem to increase resonances, and binaural beats, from what I have experienced personally, seem to increase amplitude and coherence in very narrow frequency bands. So if in the previous talk, sorry I'm going on too long here, but in the previous talk we saw examples of how consciousness in near-death and out-of-body states sort of lingered right on the edge of sleep and wakefulness and about like a 4 hertz theta state. And I mean, it just seems obvious to me that certain psychedelics that are legal, like cannabis, in conjunction with binaural beats would make for like a really awesome study.
You would, yeah.
Because I can just say, and look, this is embarrassing, but it's pretty much repeatable in me. I've done it. Like, I've experienced out-of-body states with cannabis and binaural beats. And this is embarrassing, but somebody has to say it, because these are studies that someone needs to do.
Hey, contact me. And yes, it's an excellent suggestion. Synergy is very powerful. Psychedelics, binaural beats, light, yoga, breathing, all of those things, those are all spokes on the wheel. Yes, and please contact me.
Hi, so this question is kind of a follow-up on that, but...
Could you talk more into the mic, please?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Angel.
Yeah, this question is sort of a follow-up on that, thinking about thinking about binaural beats assisting in creating a favorable set and setting for psychedelic experience. before, during, and after. So just to follow up, are there any recommended frequencies that induce particular brainwave states that might enhance a positive psychedelic experience?
So, yeah. So, let's see. I don't have a particular research study that comes to mind. Like, I would like to answer you with a study and say, this was found. Well, I mean, we've heard a lot today, like in Emma's work, they were finding that gamma band really enhanced, which quite frankly was surprising to me. I would have guessed theta, but it explains a lot of drummers, why very hyper people become drummers. So what I would say is we would need to do work for that. Before listening to Emma today, I would have suggested a theta alpha track to take you into a state of relaxation. So with my clients, I would use the theta track. That would create a state of receptivity. And then once you were in the state of receptivity, you could open your heart easier and work with me on emotional blocks. So that's one way to think about that, create receptivity with the psychedelics. Another way to think about it is the research that we heard today. Is gamma going to be an enhancement? So what I would need to do is create a little study for that. What you can do is simply have those two tracks and record the two different experiences in a subjective manner. We have to work with intuition a lot before we have facts. You know, they work together, the intuitive leaps and then the quantitative verification. Thank you for your question. Hi.
Oh, thank you for stimulating a lot of thought. You were talking about
Into the microphone, kindly.
You're talking about the individual and health and all the benefits of binaural beats. If we step up one more level into societal context, can this research be co-opted into, let's say, coercive kind of group mentality thought and control?
Can you nail a nail with a hammer? And can you hit someone over the head with a hammer?
Well, it's not quite...
It's the tool. It's the person who's holding the tool.
So could it be used in a detrimental societal mechanism for control?
I'm sure someone could come up with it.
Binaural beat sounds too good to be true. Are you aware of adverse side effects, like addictiveness or damage to other mental functions?
Yeah. You know, I think about that a lot. We don't really have any evidence for side effects on the studies that we've had so far. And I think about, okay, I love your question. I want to talk about binaural sound. Any sound that's not directly in front of us is binaural. And we'll go through our binaural hearing pathways so that we can locate it. So those sounds exist in nature. They're much shorter. A hummingbird going by, you know? When we're making a binaural beat, we are manufacturing a 10-minute. I have one study that shows that 20 minutes is really about the limit that you want to have. 20 minutes is the outer limit for binaural beats that you really want to have. So, you know, that's kind of what I have to go on. I don't know what could go wrong with that if it's a natural pathway that we exist. So it would be, you're asking like, could it harm me to listen to a hummingbird go by for 20 minutes? And I can't imagine that that would be so, but I have no scientific evidence to back my statement up. I know that I have listened to binaural beats for at least 20 minutes on numerous occasions, but I will tell you this, I don't listen to the ones on YouTube. I prefer to make my own or go to a site where I have looked at them and they have the 50 years of research that's in the field behind their product, you know, for that reason.
Thank you.
Hey there, I have two questions. The first one's like a really quick one. In your brown noise and binaural beat and music study, what beat frequency did you use?
I used 4 and 8 hertz.
So it's 2 different experimental conditions?
I used 2 different conditions.
Okay.
But I wanted them to resonate, 4 and 8. are, they're a harmonic resonance.
Okay.
I have just read a study that says that Klimesh was and I think it was in the Frontiers of Neuroscience, actually, and I believe he mathematically calculated the mean, the golden mean for each of these frequency bands, and what he says is that it's 2.5, 5, 10, 15, and 30.
Okay.
I just read that study recently.
That's really cool. I'd love to actually see that study. That's really neat.
Yeah.
So, but then the second one that I had came up in the line actually. You mentioned 40 hertz as a binaural beat to target, but in reading Dr. Oster's paper that he published, and this is a little bit dated, he made a note that 26 hertz is the maximum that you can actually achieve with binaurals, 30 being like the upper limit. So how do you target that gamma frequency of 40 hertz with a binaural?
That's an excellent question. You've asked my question for me.
Okay.
I quite frankly, after reading this paper on the golden mean by Klimesh, would probably want to use 30 hertz. I don't know, we'll have to talk to Emma about that, but right now, I would want to experiment with 30 hertz, and I find that very interesting, and I would want to bring that into the inquiry.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We just have about 5 minutes, so keep them short if you can.
Thanks.
Hi, good morning. You mentioned one of the factors being the type of headphones that were used, so I'm assuming how the sound was administered. I haven't read all of these papers.
Sorry, talk closer into the mic start from the beginning.
You mentioned one of the factors being the type of headphones that were used, so I'm assuming how the sound was administered. I haven't read all of these papers and studies myself, but I'm curious if you have come across those that focused on 360 spatial sound, and if you think that may affect the outcomes of the study. So instead of having like left and right channel, like having a 360 full immersive binaural beats experience.
So cool. I love that you asked that question. I actually just started working with a group called WeVoice in Europe that are doing the immersive 360 sound, and we're trying to figure out how to create a formula using that and the binaural beats, and there's some really interesting things happening there. For my study, it's just a pair of stereo headphones. I believe we use Bose, and my dissertation is open source, by the way. I wanted it to be open source. Anybody can go online and Google it. It's on ProQuest, and I noted the headphones used in each of those experiments. And the thing is, it just has to have the cushion, right? You can't have it against the bone. You just want a cushioned headphone. I believe I used Bose. And so what you're talking about is the next level. What are we going to do now with immersive technologies that are 360, and how is that going to affect the field? And I do not have any studies yet on that.
Okay, thank you.
Your next level.
Hello. Thank
Hi.
you so much for your talk. It was very enlightening. So my question is, I listened to this group Focus at Will. They have music that helps you kind of become more concentrated and be able to focus. And so I'm interested sort of in the relationships between concentration. And so I guess the first part of my question is, you showed that heat map. And with binaural beats, you saw like a decrease in signal. Was that a specific brain region that you were looking at, or just overall brain signal? And then second part would be, did people report more feelings of relaxation with the binaural beats? And do you know if there's any relationship with feelings of relaxation and calmness, and whether that's related to concentration as well? It's kind of a general. Yeah.
Okay. So the first question is?
The heat map you showed, was that a specific brain region that you looked at?
Can you say it a little louder?
Oh, yes. The heat map that you showed with, yeah.
The scalp topography?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was that like the entire scalp, or was that a specific region that you were looking at?
You were looking down across the top of the scalp.
Okay. Okay.
So there were 19 EEG points.
Got it.
And that was showing the points that covered the top of the head.
Okay. And do you know any sort of relationship between music leading to more concentrated states, and whether that's related to feelings of relaxation or more calm states?
So music relating to relaxation?
Yeah.
Or focus?
Yes.
So let's see. Without binaural beats, just basic music?
Binaural beats
or
as
with?
well. Yeah.
Yeah. So for relaxation, Well, first of all, if you were just to choose music, you know, by the way, everybody's different. For some people, a lullaby calms them down. For some people, it's AC/DC.
Right.
I learned that. But for you, you're going to have to go with for you. We could, in general, say that if you wanted relaxation, you want to go for your alpha theta frequencies. So that's 4 or 8 or 5 or 10 from what I just read, which is also nature, 7.83 hertz theta. That's also a meditative frequency for us, right outside our door. But yes, for binaural beats, so those would probably be relaxation tracks. It could be nature sounds, ocean, waves, rain. It could be soft piano music. I make mine with vocal pads. Sounds a little bit like Tom Kenyon, which I really like the vocals. And then if you want to focus, so I really like, I use the HoloSync focus tracks a lot. I don't know, they don't divulge their formulas, but they are also rain, natural sounds, waves, piano music, even for the focus tracks. I imagine they are using beta or gamma frequencies. I am right now making ADD tracks. We're testing them on the immediate circle of people with ADD that want to focus. I am piggybacking off the ADD research, which is showing that giving the beta frequencies is helping the ADD brain focus better. So those are not binaural beat studies, those are biofeedback studies, I believe. So those are showing that a beta frequency will help you focus. So if you as an individual need an up-tempo thing, I would put for you an up-tempo cool rhythm with the beta. But if you wanted something peaceful, then you could do an ocean wave with beta on the focus side.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you so much.
Fortunately, we're out of time, so you'll have to come up and ask her afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you so much
Thank
for a beautiful
you.
presentation. So good.
Thank you, everyone.
So we have a bit of a break now, and then Robin Carhart-Harris will be giving a keynote at 11:10. You don't want to miss that, so go get some sunshine and come right back. Thank you.